Okay. Hi, Dr. Rob.
Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Dr. Rob Weiss. I am here weekly on sexandrelationshiphealing.com to answer questions about sex, love, and relationship addiction, something that I consider to be an intimacy disorder. And we see people here asking questions about everything from too much sex to not enough sex to no sex to finding the right person, the right time, and finding out they were the wrong person, to loving the wrong person over and over again. All the issues surrounding what we call love addiction, sex addiction, serial cheating, the problems in building intimate relationships between two people is a lot of the work that we do. So welcome. We volunteer here, Tammy and I, every week, as do a lot of our colleagues and friends, on Sex and Relationship Healing, to offer you free time in whatever capacity we do. And my time is offered to answer questions. So I'm here to answer any questions you may have about relationship addiction, intimacy disorders, trauma, these kinds of sexual issues. Oftentimes there are patients from our treatment center who are here. You guys can ask questions, just don't tell anybody you're with us. Sometimes spouses are here. You know, everybody is welcome. You don't have to identify yourself. We're not going to name you or call you out. We simply want to answer your question. One more thing, if you ask a question that's very specific, I might generalize it a bit so that everybody can relate, or it's helpful for everyone. And I'll try to get your question answered in a general way if that's useful. So, Tammy, did you have?
Well, I wanted to tag on because I said this is going to be recorded. So we ask these questions in an anonymous fashion, so you will not be identified in the recording, but they are useful for people who are unable to participate, or if you heard something and you want to go, now what did he say? You can go back and watch those videos as well. There's a big library, not only with Dr. Rob, but with Dr. David Fawcett and Kristen Snowden and John Taylor. You know, so anybody who's got a webinar, there's one in Spanish. So there's an opportunity to connect and watch those videos. But we love that you're here live with us in this moment. So the first question is, can you elaborate on the difference between impulsivity versus compulsivity versus addiction?
I guess I can, although I'm not sure how to separate them out that much. So, for example, I know alcoholics who drink every single night. You know, they just can't get through the day without, you know, half a bottle or a bottle of wine or whatever it is they drink. And they are very regular drinkers. I would consider them to be compulsive drinkers. They drink on a regular basis. It's a part of their life. It's like, and compulsion, something that you do over and over again to make yourself feel better. That's what compulsion is, basically. Compulsions can be pleasure driven, like compulsion to drink, compulsion to be sexual, compulsion to gamble, or they can be non-pleasurable, like the compulsion to wash your hands at the sink over and over again, or the compulsion to make sure you've checked the stove to make sure it's not hot or still on. There are people who can be very compulsive around non-arousing or pleasurable things, and we tend to think of those people as having like obsessive compulsive disorder, where they go back to something over and over again to do it or to check it or to feel whatever, but it's not pleasurable, but it does relieve their anxiety. It makes them feel a little bit better in the moment. People who are compulsive in an addictive way tend to seek out behaviors and activities and experiences that are pleasurable. So I will be compulsive, have a compulsion to drink, or a compulsion to use sex, or compulsion to use gambling to make me feel better or escape reality. But unlike washing my hands or checking the stove, which are compulsions that make me feel better but are not pleasurable, sex and gambling and gaming and drinking and drugs, those are all compulsions that are pleasurable. So in a way, you could see sexual addiction as you can also call it sexual compulsivity. The words are pretty much interchangeable. The only difference is that we tended in the past to see compulsions as things that were not pleasurable and addictions as things that were. There are people who think of compulsive behavior in both ways. So I don't think that addiction and compulsion are really all that different, to be honest with you. And I know people that attend Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, and they're doing the exact same work that people in Sex Addicts Anonymous are doing. They just consider themselves sexual compulsive. So really it's a word thing. And depending on who you are, whether you're a scientist or a therapist or a researcher, you're going to think of that word compulsion differently. Addiction is the seeking of a behavior or a substance over and over again for a pleasurable result, which over time ends up which over time ends up in having negative consequences. Because of your alcohol use, you get DUIs. Because of your sexual behavior, your spouse finds out. And you continue to engage in it despite those negative consequences. Addicts will tend to try to externalize the problem, say it's my wife, it's my boss, and not notice that it's their very behavior with the drinking or the using or the sex that's causing the problem. Most addicts and compulsives tend to be in denial about their own problem because they're so busy trying to remain engaged in it that they don't want to hear anything about why it might be causing problems. And if it is, it's someone else's fault because they want to keep the relationship with the drugs or the sex or their behavior as primary. More important than their work, more important than their friendships, more important than their family, because that's the relationship that keeps them emotionally alive. And addicts tend to have a primary relationship with their substance or their experience that brings them pleasure in order to just get through the day. And let me just say one more thing about that. The difference between an addict and a non-addict, okay? So if I'm not an addict and I enjoy casual sex occasionally, or I enjoy porn occasionally, I will enjoy it in a manner that doesn't go against my values, doesn't go against my beliefs. If it did, I would apologize or fix it because I'd feel bad about it. If I did something that caused me problems, even though they were pleasurable and exciting, I would not do them again because not having the problem or not upsetting the other person is more important to me than continuing to look at the porn or do whatever I'm doing. But people who are addicted tend to avoid the consequences, avoid the problem, and therefore they keep doing it because it's more important over time for me to be able to escape emotionally than pay attention to my spouse or be in my life. Addiction, non-addiction. People who engage in non-addictive use of pleasurable substances and activities are doing that for whatever the reason that activity has. I'll give you an example. So we've had drink and alcohol with us since the dawn of time. And if you read the Bible or any books going before it, we had alcohol, and people used alcohol, have always used alcohol for social, and we believe actually marijuana too, if you look at some of the new research and some of what they're finding under rocks and inside of boxes from 5,000 years ago. But anyway, we've always used substances of some sort to for spiritual ceremonies, for connecting as human beings, for building relationship, for couples easing up their anxiety, you know, and even in modern culture, we get together to have a drink to relax. We get together to have a drink to connect. We get together to have a drink or two to blow off steam. But if you're an addict, if you're an alcoholic, you're not drinking for the same reason that everyone else you're with is drinking. If I'm not an alcoholic, I'm drinking because I want to relax, because I want to have a good time, because I want to be with my friends, because it brings us together and I've had a tough week. But if I'm an alcoholic, I'm drinking to feel okay about myself. If I'm an alcoholic, I'm drinking just to get through the day or just to feel like I can tolerate my dinner or tolerate the day. In other words, I'm not drinking to have fun. An alcoholic may start drinking to have fun, but over time, the drinking just becomes a way to feel okay. The person who's not an alcoholic keeps drinking occasionally, and it's always a little bit fun when they drink because they are not compelled. They don't have a compulsion to drink. If you're a sex addict, if I'm a sex addict, I would engage in the past in behaviors that I knew would hurt other people, that I didn't care would hurt other people, that I didn't care how it affected me because it was more important to use that behavior to feel better about myself, to escape into. Healthy people use casual sex because, I don't know, for procreation, for recreation, for pleasure, you name it, people have casual sex, and good for them. But addicts don't use casual sex for the same reason. Sex addicts don't use casual sex because it's fun or distracting or to have a baby or to meet someone. They have casual sex to feel okay about themselves. So as a sex addict, I just go out to have sex with strangers or whatever kind of sex I'm having just to feel okay. So you may look at me as a non-sex addict and say, what a sleazy bastard, you know, he's out there having all this sex with strangers. And clearly, you know, I was able to stop having strangers when I got married. Why hasn't he been able to stop? Well, because you're a healthy person who was able to stop because you were able to put your partner in mind and keep them in mind. And that relationship has always been more important than casual sex. But if you're an addict, your most important relationship will always be to the thing that you can use for escape or emotional survival or to disappear. And even though you may love someone else, it will be more important to you to hold on to that relationship, to the addiction, because that's how you emotionally survive. Long story, hope that's helpful.
It was a great question to ask too, so thank you for the question. So the next one is, my husband's porn use has been an ongoing issue in our 15-year marriage with promises to stop over the years. I now found webcams, selfies, etc. in his email. He saw a therapist for 3 sessions only. Tomorrow is our first couples counseling. I'm supportive to the understanding this is addiction. How do we start in therapy?
Well, let's go back just for a second. I want to say something about porn use since you brought that up. So when you talk about webcam selfies, let me just say something about that. What this woman is saying, I believe it's a woman, is that it's not just she's seen her husband looking at some porn sites. Now she's seen him involved with cam girls or cam boys. And what those are, and everyone should know this, porn is not porn, okay? When you pull up porn to look on a porn channel, you don't just get porn. You get a few pages that click in behind the porn, and they're live people. So if I were to go on a YouTube channel, or sorry, on an XTube channel, which is most of the porn sites are some kind of tube channel, they call themselves. If I like gay tube and lesbian tube and straight tube and whatever. But all the tube channels, if I were to click on them and I was to click on some porn, right next to it or in front of it or behind it, there'd be someone live saying, hi, here I am. I'm taking my clothes off. Would you like to have sex with me? And so the way a lot of the porn organizations make money is not with porn so much anymore, because many people are happy enough with free porn, and there's a lot of free porn out there. So what they've done is turn themselves into prostitution organizations, where you go there for the porn, but within a minute or two there's a person there, and all of a sudden you give them their credit card and you're talking to that person to get them to take their clothes off or to do whatever it is you want them to do. And there are interactive devices with computers. I can plug something in and that person can masturbate me long distance. So there are lots of things I can do with someone I'm paying for sex online. And when virtual reality is here, as it's about to be, you will be it's going to be a different world, because there are going to be people who simply aren't going to be able to leave the online connection they feel they're getting with that person. And if that happens soon, I'm going to be really, really busy. Sorry. But in any case, I wanted to speak to your question. So, you know, it's inevitable, I think, if someone has an out-of-control sexual problem and they're using a lot of porn and they're not a porn addict, meaning they're not one of those people who's just stuck with porn and can't go beyond it, but someone who can have sex with adults and has, that if they're looking at a lot of porn, it's going to become unsatisfying. And eventually, they're going to start chatting with the people online who are live, and that's a lot more interesting. So, you know, whether your husband or anybody's spouse who's been in this situation is actually hooked up live with someone, I can't say. But I do think it's important to recognize what it means when somebody is sending pictures of themselves, when someone's chatting online, and what's probably happening if they're a frequent porn user and now you find them sending this stuff to strangers. It means they're probably online connecting with people they're paying, basically online prostitution. Okay, so what do you talk about in therapy? I think the most, and I'm going to ask Tammy to come in here behind me, because I'm not a woman here, and she is, and I'm not married to a man as a woman, but she is. So I think she might have some things to say as well, having heard a lot of these stories. But let me just say to you that I think the first thing and the most important thing that you can do is a couple of things. I would be upfront in therapy about how much of a priority this issue is in my marriage. Like, I just want you to know that this really upsets me, and every time I come home, I feel sick about it. Or, you know what, after 15 years of this, I'm done. And if I have one more day of this, I'm leaving. I mean, whatever is true for you, I think it's important for you to think about that and make it very clear at the beginning what the stakes are if your spouse is not willing to take this seriously. I think that's just important. Like, you know, I'm thought about this and I'm not sure I'm going to stay. Or I'm thought, you know, just whatever is true for you. It may be true for you that you don't care because he's not leaving you. He's just doing stuff online, and that's fine too. There are no rules here except the ones between you and the person you love. So the other thing I think that is essential, in addition to saying like what your bottom lines are around all this, why it's important to you, is how it leaves you feeling. I think your feelings are essential here. Men will often say, oh, well, my dad looked at Playboy, so what's the big deal? I'm just chatting here, and I'll never meet this person, and they're 1,000 miles away, and what difference does it make? Well, it hurts your spouse's feelings. It makes the woman you're with feel like she's less than. She finds herself seeing you looking at the porn and doubting herself. That is enough reason for you to stop looking at porn. And if this is a woman who says, I don't give a poop what you look at as long as you're with me and we're having fun when we're together, then that's great. But if you're with someone who feels uncomfortable about it, your husband doesn't get to say that that means there's something wrong with you. If you're uncomfortable with it, you're uncomfortable with it. And your husband's first and most important response, And if he's an addict, this won't be. Should be something like, oh, wow, if it upsets you, I really want to pay attention to that. Not, well, what's the guy to do? I look at porn occasionally. We're not having as much sex as we used to. What's the big deal? My dad looked at porn. All that is bullshit, in my opinion, if it upsets you. Because the most important issue is I'm in a relationship with the person and they're upset. So porn or no porn, right or wrong, let me stop right here and pay attention to the fact that I'm doing something upsetting my partner so I can understand it. And whether I get to continue or not is less important than how he or she and I are getting along. And those are the things I think that are important, how much it is affecting you, how it's affecting you, what it means to you, and how much of an issue this is in the totality of your relationship. I would not hold back. And I think it's really important that you make sure that the therapist you see backs you fully. Because if your husband turns around and says, you know, Mary, we haven't had sex in 3 years and you've gained 40 pounds and you're sitting there overweight and looking like you haven't had sex in a long time, that session can go badly. So I want you to make sure if a therapist in any way, promise me this, if they're not trained, says, well, you know, maybe he wouldn't be doing this, you say, excuse me. He's been doing this for 15 years. When I was younger and we didn't have kids and we're having lots of sex, this is what he does. So it's really important that you get out under the idea that somehow she's to this or she's to that or not enough this, and therefore I. It doesn't work that way. I look at porn because I want to. That's it. Nobody's fault. Nobody's blamed. It's just because I want to. And you know what? I might not look at porn even though I want to because I love my spouse more and I respect how they feel. Or I may say, you know what? I don't want to look at porn. If you leave me, that's no big deal. Great. Everything will be on the table. But let's get the stuff clear. And after 15 years, you deserve some very clear answers. But don't let the therapist make you wrong because you don't feel comfortable with the porn. You have a right to feel that way, no, whatever the reasons are. And it's important for you to be heard. Anything else, Tammy?
Well, no, I think a lot of it, you are here saying that this has been an ongoing issue in our 15-year marriage. So clearly you have feelings that are negative about this. I want to add on to what Dr. Rob was talking about with, I get so many emails from partners, spouses that talk about that the therapist said, what's the big deal? It's just porn. So when Dr. Rob talked about having a qualified therapist, that's really important. Somebody that understands, you know, the nuances with sex and porn addiction versus, you know, just, you know, well, if you, you know, do whatever he wants, then it'll all be fine. Minimizing your feelings. You were going to say something?
Well, this person didn't say, and so we don't know if she said that her husband was a porn addict. She said he'd been looking for 15 years, but we don't know if he's really a porn addict or if he's just kind of an asshole who got to look at porn as much as he wants. I mean, I don't know, you know, that determination is not something that I don't think a spouse can make just because someone is dog-headed and wants to keep looking at it. There may be other things going on. Sex addiction is a thing. It actually has criteria and a diagnosis. So he may just be a jerk or he may be addicted to the porn. I don't know from what you've said. I want to be clear about that.
Correct. I agree 100%, but I also agree with everything you said with the find a qualified therapist that is going to hear things and not minimize your feelings on this as well. Dr. Rob wrote a book called Out of the Doghouse, and it's about rebuilding trust. And it's I think an interesting place to start, because if he wants to rebuild trust with you, then, you know, there's some really basic things. Do this, don't do that, you know, and you can get kind of a gauge on that. There's also, Dr. Rob has had a number of guests that have talked about porn use, abuse on his podcast series, Sex, Love, and Addiction. There's a lot of great guests on there with a lot of interesting and educational content. So you may find some helpful resources in that as well.
I typed the book up for them in the chat if they want it, and I'll type the podcast up as well.
Okay. So you ready for the next question?
Yes, ma'am.
This is from a male. How has becoming porn sex addiction free benefited your life or in general the life of your clients? So and then there's a part 2, but let's start with that.
Oh, okay. Wait, I wanted to write something down. Will you write the name of our podcast is Sex, Love?
Yes, I'm on it.
Sex, Love, and Addiction. Then we can take turns that way. Okay, I'll give you part 1. How has porn and sex addiction free benefited my life or the life of the clients that I work with? I'm going to make a generalization and say that The addicts, the people that I work with generally feel unworthy as people. They walk around feeling, for whatever reasons in life, that they don't deserve love, they don't deserve affection. If people really understood them and knew them very well and everything about them, that they ultimately would be found flawed and unlovable. In other words, most of the people that I have worked with over the years, including myself, have very shame-based sense of self. And this has to do with our upbringings and what we learned about our value growing up in a variety of ways. So when we become adults, and this isn't just for sex and porn addicts, I think it's for any addict, alcoholic, drug addict, it really applies across the board. When you become an adult, so here's the deal. If you already think you're a fuck up, if you already think you're unworthy, and it doesn't matter how good your grades are or how well you did in school, but if inside you feel like, I know that nobody really knows me is going to love me, and so I got to pretend to be whoever it is they need to be in order to make them happy, and I better not tell them about the parts of me that aren't you know yourself if you know yourself. Those of us who will put on a good face and let the person see the best part of us, or our friends, and not know all about us. So and that's the deal with addiction. Addiction is about compartmentalization. Addiction is about keeping secrets. So actually, this question, Tammy, goes to the reason why we named the company what we named it. The company's called Seeking Integrity, the one that Tammy and I work for. And the reason it's named Seeking Integrity is because integrity, in my mind, is the goal of all recovery. And recovery from addiction is about taking away all these separate parts of me, all these compartments, all these boxes, all these hidden things, and just being me with everything that I've done and everything I've been through, open and real. You love me or you don't. Because when you are out there in boxes, it's very hard to know that you were truly loved. You know, if I am an incredibly warm, loving, kind husband who also happens to be having an affair, it doesn't matter when my spouse says to me, honey, you're the greatest husband since sliced bread. I love you. I think to myself, well, she wouldn't love me or he wouldn't love me if they knew I was having that affair. So as long as you ask me what recovery does, it allows us to not have secrets, to not have reasons to tell people, or tell ourselves, well, it's great that they like me, but if they knew this, they wouldn't. Or it's great that they love me, but we get to be integrated people. That's where that word integrity comes from, integration. Integration on any level, political or otherwise, means taking separate parts and bringing them together into a whole, integrating. So when you become an integrated person, you have integrity. Integrity comes from the word integration. It means I don't have parts that you see and parts that you don't see and parts that are having integrity means all my parts are open. There's nothing I have to hide from you. It's not that I would like you to see me getting undressed for bed because that's private. But if you heard from a friend that Rob Weiss got undressed for bed, you wouldn't be like, oh my God, Rob gets up, because it's not a secret. It's not a surprise. There's nothing about me that I'm hiding. Now, I don't necessarily want you to know about my sexual life and the details of it, but does my spouse know? Does my therapist know? Does my sponsor know? Are there people in my life who know everything about me and I have nothing hidden? Absolutely. And that gives me the grace of knowing when I'm going off base, or because I turn to those people who know me well and I say, is this a good idea? And they're like, well, knowing you. So acknowledging addiction and changing behavior allows me, and I think the people I work with, to counter so many messages and beliefs that we've carried our whole lives. Many of us have been acting out sexually or with drugs or alcohol for such a long time. In other words, we've been lying and cheating and manipulating for so long that it makes sense to us. We believe that we're not worthwhile. We believe we're shitty people. We believe that even though we think we're getting away with something, underneath we know we're not getting away with anything because we don't feel worthy. And to take all of that away and to have, when you look at me and I smile, it's just a smile. I'm not looking for anything. I don't want anything. And I'll give you another peace of mind. And if you're a sex addict, you'll really get this. And this is, Tammy, not exactly pleasant. But when I itch somewhere, it's just an itch. And when I have a sore on my body, it's just a pimple, because I'm not out there doing anything. So here's another thing I don't worry about as a sex addict. I don't worry about getting diseases. I don't worry about getting caught in uncomfortable places. I don't worry whether someone's got a camera. I don't worry that I'm going to bring something home to my spouse, or they're going to find out about something. I get to live a life of integrity where I don't have, and that to me, and Tammy may give and others may give many, many gifts, your healthy relationships, healthy work, being available emotionally to see what other people need, not putting myself first, and being able to be more empathic and more compassionate and more of a kind friend and loved one. All of those things come because I'm not so obsessed with myself and my own behavior. And addiction is, by definition, an obsession with yourself and your own behavior. Before we answer the second part, do you have thoughts about, Tammy, how being free of addiction helps your life?
Well, I think you answered it beautifully. I think even when
Well,
you
I
said
agree
the
with
lying,
that.
well, there's that. But even the lying, it's not just lying to others, it's the lying to ourselves. You know, the lying to ourselves that we're either not hurting anybody or we're not doing anything bad, or the lying to ourselves that we're just a complete piece of poop and that we don't deserve anything good. And I think both of those extremes are extremes and part of what addiction brings. So, you know, I love living in integrity, and I strive to daily do that. You know, some days I do better than others, but I really always am striving for that, you know, and I can continue to see progress with that. But, and the ability to make real connections. You talked about that. You've got people in your life. And when you first got into recovery, well, I'll speak for myself. When I first got into recovery, I didn't have those real connections. So recovery has also given me the ability to attach in a healthy way to people that have something that can model good behavior to me. They have things that I want. They aren't being sneaky characters themselves. You know, they aren't just addicts looking. You know, I was hanging out with other addicts. You know, so you know, we were all on that, you know, bottom feeder level, quite frankly. So
Tammy, read the second question, because I think we should weigh in on that. It's a good one.
yes.
So this is probably a gay guy, I'm guessing.
Doesn't say, but says who. So this is the continuation. Who or what has been your motivation for fighting the addiction? I have no partner and really no one cares. And that's one of the fallacies I'd like to push. I think being motivated is pretty difficult. It seems easier to be motivated if you are straight and have a spouse and kids and that you're doing this for.
Okay, well, I agree that most of the people who come into treatment, probably 9 out of 10, come in because they're in a crisis. Something happened. They lost a job because their boss found them looking at porn. Their spouse, as you said, is enraged and upset and hurt because they found out about XYZ. They got a disease and passed on to a spouse. But there are other reasons that people seek recovery that are not related to that, like I'm lonely all the time. Like I've dated or had sex with a lot of people and I still find my life to be lonely and empty. I long for connection, I long for relationship, but I find myself ending up in casual things or unavailable things, or, you know, I've been hurt a few times. This process of healing is not about like stopping the porn and then everything gets better. It doesn't. This is an active process. So the process of this healing that we do, that they do in 12-step programs, that we do in rehab, all of this healing is involved. Yes, we define what you want to change and stop, but there's a much greater emphasis on how do you want to live your life. A friend of mine was saying so Tammy said I do podcasts, and I will say to you that we have probably, I'll name maybe a top 50 podcast in the United States, and we're up there. We have about 5,000 downloads a week. It's very exciting. And I think that's because we're giving really meaningful content to people and not fluff. But on sex, love, and addiction, I talk about this a lot. And, you know, it's like, how do I want to say this to you? Actually, let me put it this way. I wrote a book for gay men called Cruise Control, Understanding Sex Addiction in Gay Men. And I think that if you're a gay person, man or woman, but especially gay man, I didn't write the book for women, there's another book for women. Can become, because men can be very much interested in casual sex and not much more. Because as men, we can be easily satisfied with sex and go to sleep. Because we often look for that person who's going to help us open up emotionally, and that casual trick isn't always that person. We walk around often as gay men pretty lonely. A lot of our engagements are around sex and outside of the larger world. We're not necessarily on a gay team. We're not necessarily, you know, in a gay choir. We're not necessarily, and I'm not saying that you have to spend all your time with gay people, but you should have some kind of community that is there to support you 24/7 and that understands you and is there for you. I'll tell you what, I don't say this very often. In fact, I don't think I've ever said this here. I am one of the rare people that did seek recovery because I was lonely. And I'm not saying I'm a better sex addict or worse sex addict, but I could not live the way I was living anymore. I would break the hearts of people I was dating, and I knew it. I would not be available when someone opened up to me, and I knew it. I would put myself in compromising situations, and I knew it. I was living in ways that didn't lead me toward feeling self-esteem. I had to learn that being gay wasn't about who I had sex with or how much sex I had. And that being gay, you know, was a lot about community and relationships and connection, and just like being in any community is. And I think being a gay man whose primary connection to other men is sex is probably a very lonely life, because you're missing out on all the good stuff. And by the way, I'll tell you something else. Here's a practical matter. I don't know how old you are, but the older you get, the more you're out there looking for strangers for sex, the uglier it looks. You know, it's pretty easy when you're 25, 35, and even 45. But when you get a little bit older, people are not necessarily interested in you for sex. And when they are, their reasons are pretty skewed. So there becomes a practical matter, which is if you want to be a sexual being and you want to have connections with people, are you going to keep hooking up with strangers? Because the numbers for harm to you go up with every stranger. So on every level, I can't tell you how important it is to grow connection. And I'm not saying to you that you have to stop having casual sex. I don't know whether that works for you or not. But if you want to have a meaningful, long-term, committed relationship, which I don't care what anybody says, we all want, because that's how we were bred. That's who we are. We're in our DNA. We are meant to pair bond. And even those of us who aren't able to achieve long-term committed relationships, the healthy ones among us have deep, enduring friendships. And I'll say one more thing about what Tammy said earlier. I have a lot, and I've said this, I think, recently. I've had a lot of, many years, men would come in for assessment and treatment. And when I would say to them, do you have friends? Do you have community? Do you have people? Oh, they would say, I have lots of friends. I have these great friends at work, and I have these friends from college, and then my wife's friends, oh, they're really close. We see them all the time. And then I'll say, well, how many of your friends know about the details of your sexual history and your sexual behavior? And then they get really quiet, because most of them realize that they've been acting as an isolated, single being with no one knowing anything about this part of their life for a long time, knowing lots about other parts of their lives, but this part has kind of been kept secret. And that's compartmentalized, that's disintegrated, and it isn't really healthy for us as people. So anyway, I hope that's helpful.
It is. This is from a female. I'm a single woman, sex and love addict, currently working on step 4. Good job. In thinking of the harm that I've done, I keep coming back to my self-seeking and objectifying of men as a way to validate my own insecurity. Would you consider it harm done to the men I've acted out when they were also objectifying and using me? I want to be radically honest with myself on the damage that I've done.
Tammy, would you start the answer to this?
Well, yes. So first of all, I'm going to point you on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. Our good friend Charlie Rizian did a very good, thorough video on breaking down exactly what to do with step 4. So I'd invite you, all 12 steps are there. So I'd invite you to consider that as a, as a
resource.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the word. So, to me, first of all, I really encourage you to do this with a sponsor too, to help you identify. But for me, what I did was I put down everything. I didn't overanalyze it. I let my sponsor and people help. So if I'm thinking about it, because I could rationalize the heck out of anything. It's like, well, they harmed me as much as I harmed them. So therefore, and maybe part of what you're doing is you're writing it down because you harmed yourself. It could be part of the, this was harmful to me and my perception, and, and I put myself in, a negative environment, etc. So I'm thinking that if you're thinking about it, write it down. Somebody else can help you sort it out and figure out. I had some things that I wrote down and that my sponsor helped me go, well, let's flip the lens on it a little bit, and I could take those off, but I wrote them all down. That's my thought. And
yeah, I want to add to that too. I think that while it isn't necessarily your responsibility how someone acts, if someone else throws a brick, it's not my responsibility. If I'm spending time with that person, it might be in some ways reflective of me. And so, if I'm being sexual with someone who's married, or I'm having sex with someone who's in a relationship, or I'm having sex with someone who's drinking, or, you know, and really, like, am I really aware of how the choices that I'm making are affecting this other person or the people in their life? And if you don't necessarily see these men, you know, I get it. I had sex with people. They had fun. I had fun. What's the harm? Well, maybe I was the person that they decided to have sex with instead of their spouse. I'm the person they had sex with instead of picking up their kid for school. You know, because I put myself in that situation, there are many untold harms I may have caused, and I'll never know what they were. So I agree with Tammy. I think you have to put it all down and just assume that, you know, if you were using someone else, they were, you know, you don't bear responsibility for their actions, but you do bear responsibility for the way you acted and the carelessness in which you may have invited people into your life.
Well, and self-harm deserves to be on the list too. So
self-harm is, oh, you know, when you start to, it's like, oh, I was sexual with this person and this person. Oh, I didn't even like this person. Yeah, when you start to get into that, there's self-harm in there too.
Okay, the next one. My husband is a truly good man, but during his affair, sexual, not emotional, he did some despicable things, and he lied a lot to cover up his activities even after his affair was discovered. From listening to your podcast and online events, I know now that he has intimacy issues and is likely on a spectrum for sex addiction. He insists he will never do anything like this again, but I'm having issues rebuilding trust. He does not seem to be able to grasp the concept of having work to do on himself. He's seen 6 or 7 therapists, but none more than a few times. He's read out of the doghouse and after a good man cheats, but he truly doesn't seem to understand that there is work he needs to do. How do I get him to understand that I can't just flip a switch, trust again, and move forward? He just acts depressed and shameful when I try to talk to him. He says, I don't want there to be something wrong with me.
Okay. I'm not even sure where to start.
I know that's a lot. So
first of all, I believe that your husband is a good man. I work with men every day in treatment, and I look at them and I spend time with them and I say, what a great guy. You know, and then I read the letter from their wife, which we use in treatment, that says, you know, he hit the kids, he drank, he did that. I'm like, wow, this isn't the person I've met at all. And I realize this is not a surprise to me, that most of the people, when I'm working with them, I'm not seeing the parts that you're seeing, the painful parts that go on inside the relationship. And I get that. He does not have to do work on himself. I think that's really important for me to say. You have written a note where you said, he will never do anything again. He doesn't seem to grasp these concepts. He's not, you know, but he doesn't think there's more work he needs to do. How can I understand? I don't think you can get, I mean, you can only say, look, this is what you can do. You can say, look, I don't feel safe in our relationship, and I need us to go to some counseling so that I can begin to work out with you what happened. And in that room, you can begin to explore, if you have a good therapist, what it meant to you, what it meant to him, what he means by, I won't do this again, what he means by that pained expression when he, you know, there's a lot of communication that is not happening here. He's turning away from you with, does she have to bring this up again? And I'm not going to do it again. And I wish she'd just not bring this up again. And that's how he feels. And you're turning him with, how come you're not like taking some action to make it better? And how come we can't move forward because you're not restoring my trust? And that's just a stuck place for both of you. And I think this is the kind of situation that would involve a professional helping the two of you figure out how to work through this communication. I mean, clearly, you know, your husband may not be a sex addict. I don't know. If he's not a sex addict, he may have cheated a bunch when he was younger, realized what it did to his family, grown up a little bit and said, I won't do this anymore. And he isn't. However, if he really is a sex addict, then he's going to lie and tell you that he's not doing what he's continuing to do, or he's not going to do what he's planning to do. And his annoyance is really because he wants you to shut up so he can keep doing what he's doing. And I don't know the answers to that. I don't know if you do, but I do think, and by the way, your husband sounds depressed. You know, someone who sits around in shame and doesn't want to do much and doesn't communicate. And, you know, has he always been that way? Has he gotten worse as the years have gone by? Was the porn a way for him to feel okay, or the sex? I think there's so many unanswered questions in the way you write this that I think you both need to be in therapy together. And by the way, I don't make any kickbacks. If another person in the United States goes to therapy, I don't get a dime. But I would like to see your marriage get better. And it feels like there's questions that, look, you've given him good books to read. about how to look at the role of a husband or a spouse when you've cheated, and he's not picking up on the hint. So I think you have to sit with a professional and say, okay, what's going on here? Because I'm not getting through, and this is making me very unhappy.
Yeah, I think I want to reiterate qualified therapists. There's too many therapists, and there's some great therapists, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of them that just don't understand, and we don't know if he's a sex addict or, I mean, they don't. And so, they don't have, they have their information that they know, and that's kind of it. So, I mean, it's a very specialized field, and it's challenging even for a good marriage and family therapist, if this type of, if there is any kind of compulsive addictive behavior going on, most don't have the training to be able to deal with it. So I would really encourage you to make sure that you get qualified help. The next question is, could you or I describe the role that step 4 played in your own recovery? May I answer that a little bit? Yeah. So to me,
I want to stop. Can you explain what step 4 is? We keep talking about this, but lots of people don't know what we're talking about. And what is a step and all of it?
So the 12 steps of AA was originally created, and all of the various 12-step programs, SA, SAA, all of those take the version of the steps. They may change a few. It's like they're not going to say alcohol in them. They're going to say whatever the addictive behavior is. But step 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And for my time in recovery, I have seen many people get to step 4 and take a really long time or never quite get it done. And to me, it is one of the pivotal things that really starts changing changing your ability to. The step 4 and step 5 was so freeing for me. I can't emphasize enough. And it gave me a platform to understand that I didn't have to live with the shame forever. I didn't have to feel like a defective person forever. So it was really one of those, every time somebody's newer in recovery and they're talking about taking 9 months or a year with step 4, there's a program out there. I can't think of what it's called, but it's about doing it fast. It's Back to Basics. And they take you through the whole 12 steps in like a weekend, and then you do it again later. And I think that's great. That's how it was kind of originally set up, is a newcomer would come and they'd sit down and they'd do the first 12 steps. Yeah. Or in the first couple of hours. But, and I think you get the sense of relief, and it doesn't have to be that you've done it perfectly. You can do it again. And then you can do the continuing steps, 10 and 11 and 12. So 1 through 3 are kind of like, I get a clue, 4 through 9 are I'm cleaning up my past, and 10 through 12 are like, here's how you can move forward and make amends when necessary, so you don't have to get a whole big pile of garbage accumulated. So great, continue, and you don't have to do it perfectly. You can do even like a step 4 on an issue. That's, I've done that. I have a lot of friends that have done that. You can go, this issue is causing me problems, so I'm going to do a step 4 on it. It's very revealing and freeing.
So Tammy, just to say it, there are some guidelines, like Pat Carnes wrote A Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps, which is a great guide. Are there other guides? And I think Hazelden, if you go online, they have guides for each step. You can look. Are there anything you'd recommend?
Well, yes. And even the big books have, they have there's the 12 and 12, which takes you through each. The 12 and 12 is the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. And so, and those have some really good information, and getting somebody who's already done it, like the guideline of having a sponsor who's ahead of you and has done that already. Now, somebody asked over here in the chat, where can you find a sponsor? Great question. So we have, it might be at a 12-step. It also could be because we have these drop-in groups. We have found that people are connecting in the various drop-in groups and meeting outside. Like if they've identified that, there's something there and they want to be able to support each other outside of the 12 or the drop-in groups, you can exchange information and you can talk, or text or whatever, on an ongoing basis. But, and a sponsor isn't a lifelong commitment. It's like, find somebody that meets with you and helps you with this phase of your life. And then you can find someone else who, takes you through the next part of the journey. So, like none of this stuff has to be done perfectly. It's just more like do it.
Really quick.
Yeah.
I think that working that step helped me to get out of the belief that I was such a horrible person.
Yes.
Because when I stepped back and I looked at everything that I'd done and all of the concerns I had about myself and a real inventory, I thought, well, I haven't always been nice. I haven't always been kind. I certainly have been troubled, but this isn't a bad person. And I had always thought of myself as a bad person. And for the first time, I think I allowed myself to say, maybe I'm actually a good person who's done a lot of stupid things. And I think the steps, the beginning, the first four in particular, helped guide me in that direction.
Yes. When I heard I was a typical female
Right.
addict, I was like, oh, I'm not the worst piece of, whatever. So somebody said, you can, the 12-step guide, the 12 steps on SARH, and there's a link, in there. Uh, there's lots of resources for working through the 12 steps. So it really is, do it. So can you describe the benefits one more thing on sponsors. Females have female sponsors. Males have male sponsors. That's really important. Can you describe the benefits of having a committed person engaged in SA recovery versus being alone? Also, what is normal supposed to look like and feel like in an SA's world? Great question.
So I'm not sure. Can you describe the benefits of having a committed person engaged in SA's recovery versus being alone?
So should I even bother dating if my choice is dating somebody in SA? I think I'm getting that right. So it's like, would I be better off alone or dating somebody who's committed to an SA
Oh my
program?
God, pick the addict, please.
They're working on
Don't leave
themselves.
us out there. I mean,
Yeah.
look, at least you know what our problem is. Think of the people you might date. You don't find out for years. The biggest problem for addicts is not, in relationships, is really not our drinking, using, acting out sexually. That's a problem for us. But our problem in relationships is lying, manipulation, secrets, and completely denying your trust because we're more invested in our addiction. So how great would it be to meet someone that you liked and get involved with them, someone who already is aware of their issues, is already working on their issues, someone who can articulate and take responsibility for their own behavior. I'm not saying that addicts are the best thing since sliced bread. Believe me, we struggle and we will struggle all of our lives. But if you're someone who thinks you can tolerate that struggle, you see the person you care about as a good person, and you see them really committed to moving forward on this path of healing, I think you're better off than dating a normie, because that normie may end up being pretty crazy and you didn't even see it, but neither did they. And I wrote a book, my book's coming up today, Codependence, which is about the fact that we may very well marry or get involved with. In fact, the only person that may really turn us on is someone with a few issues, because we have a few issues and nature guides us toward people like us to work through them. Having a few issues and having somebody else have a few issues that you're attracted to is a great thing, as long as you're both committed to working on them. The only time it doesn't work, so if you said, I want to marry this guy who's an addict, but he's not sure he's an addict, doesn't want to commit to the program, I'd be like, stay away. But if you said, I'm interested in someone who's been working on themselves for years. So let me reframe this for you. This question, I'll restate this question for you. Do you think that it would be a good thing for me to, here, I'll ask you the question. Do you think it would be a good thing for you to date someone who's been in therapy for years, is a strong part of a healing community, and makes efforts every day to think about how they can be a better person? You decide. That's an addict in recovery. So when we're working on ourselves, we can still be difficult, but at least you know what the difficulties are and what you're up against. And as long as we're committed to healing, how great is that?
And I'll share, my husband is a normie, and
Mine too.
brave man that he is, this was years ago, and he was like, maybe you should go to a meeting. And my first reaction was like, man, you should tell me what to do. And I kept my mouth shut and I went to a meeting. And then, you know what? Things were a lot better after that. So I gave him a lot of credit for that. But even he was, recognized that if I went to a meeting, it shifts my frame of mind, it shifts my attitude. So it was a good thing. So So next question, this one I want you to answer. My husband's acting out has gotten so insane, I was beginning to question my own sanity. In order to validate that I was not crazy and in an attempt to make him stop, I publicly disclosed his behavior to too many people, family, friends, neighbors. He's currently in rehab. I feel an enormous amount of guilt and shame for outing him. Do you have any advice for dealing with the family, friends, and neighbors?
Well, I mean, this is a good object. I'm sorry that that happened. And I understand that sometimes you just get so out of control and are looking for anybody who will support you, or you're so angry and not getting the response you want that you're just like, screw this person. I'm going to let everybody know what they did to me. And I'm glad that you recognize that that's not a good idea. And the reason it's not a good idea, as you have also discovered, is you've got to face those people maybe a year from now, maybe 5 years from now. Maybe you're going to see him across the Thanksgiving table next year, only your husband's going to be there and they're going to know all about him. And so it's not just him who you've embarrassed, or it's yourself, because you're a reflection. You know, you're a couple now, and do we want to invite that sex addict and his wife over? I'm just saying that I think that I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. What's done is done. And if you did it out of anger and you did it out of hurt, that's your work to do, to acknowledge that and clean that up. I think that the most damaging is when you tell children. You know, it's one thing to say to somebody's mother, did you know he had an affair? Or to say somebody's, you know, coworkers, you're, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be bad. But when you say it to your children, that's really the most problematic, because you know, it really isn't the responsibility of a 14-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 24-year-old to know anything about their father or mother's sexual behavior. And if you're having problems, I'm not saying this to you, I'm saying this to everybody, it's important for your kids to know, well, dad and I are struggling, or your mom and I aren't getting along, or important they know something's going on, but the details of either of your sexual lives is something that they will carry in their heads the rest of their lives, and they don't need to, okay? It's not, you don't have to be father confessor to your children, brother confessor to your children about these kinds of issues. You can say we're having relationship issues, romantic issues, you know, whatever you want to call it, but I wouldn't get into the details. And so I just wanted to put that out there for those folks who think, well, I'm going to tell the kids. Just don't tell the kids. Tell anybody but the kids. You may feel great about it now, and 5 years from now, when they have kids, you're going to be thinking, and they say, is it okay to have dad over? Because you know that problem he had 5 years ago. I don't know if we should have him over with the 3-year-old. You're going to regret having said it.
And don't tell people that are going to tell the kids.
Right. Your spouse is in treatment, wherever that is, and that means that he has the resources to be working on this. And I assume that if he's in treatment, you're going to have some couple sessions, you're going to be talking about couples issues, and you're going to come back and do couples work. So I would not take this out of context. I think if he is in treatment, I would tell him this. I think it's good for him to get the difficult news whenever, you know, if you're going to divorce somebody, you're going to leave somebody, you're going to hurt somebody, you're going to tell them bad news, tell them while they're in treatment, not before they get there, not after they come home. That's what we're there to help with. So what a great time for you to call them up and say, you know, I was so pissed at you. I told everyone you know, including your boss and your mother. And I guess we're going to have to figure that one out. And maybe as a couple, you can figure it out together in counseling and with support. He's going to be angry and hurt, but you know, he doesn't have a leg to stand on, so he's not going to be able to stand on it. But I respect and admire the fact that you realize you crossed a line for yourself. And that would really be what I'd be concerned with, is how can I take care of myself so this doesn't happen again?
And I'm thinking if all the people know what he did, then telling the people that he's gone to treatment for it might be the next step.
It's a good idea. I agree with Tam. It's like, you don't want to drop oh, my husband's an alcoholic. Oh gosh, I'm sorry I told you. And then you never hear anything. You know, since you've gotten these people invested in the process, I think you have to go back and say, depending on who the person is, you know, I'm feeling really good about this. We're doing better. He's in treatment. Gosh, treatment is great, or whatever it is, you know, and if you're not happy or things aren't working out, make sure you're very selective about where you take that.
Do you find that many people married to sex addicts also deal with their own love and relationship addiction? I ask because that was the case in my previous marriage. I was a love addict that continuously adapted and accommodated my ex-husband's sex addiction.
So I'm going to say this in a broader way, because I don't want to use labels like addict, or I want to say that everyone who comes here on a regular basis and relates to the work that I write about, that Tam and I do, and others, you have an intimacy disorder. I have an intimacy disorder. I would rather have sex with a stranger than turn to a friend and talk about having a bad day. You know, sex is a much easier way for me to relieve tension and anxiety than holding on to it, dealing with it, talking about it, and working through it. And I learned this very young. So what I learned very young, more than any particular sexual act, and I think this is true for all of us who are here, we might have learned that intimacy in all of its is just too much. Like, I don't want to get too close to someone, or getting really close to people is difficult or painful. Intimacy disorders tend to do that. So you may, let's say, marry someone who is kind of emotionally unavailable, and then you spend a lot of time chasing them, and then you find out they have an addiction, and that's why they're not available. But maybe in the last relationship, because you have a need to not get too close to people because it's scary for you, whatever that means for you. Next time you choose a completely available person, and then you only date them for a short period of time because you find them boring and you move on. Or you start dating an available person and you feel really uncomfortable and you feel overwhelmed by what they need, and so you go out and act out. In other words, I don't think it's a matter of I'm an addict, they're an addict, I'm gonna act out, they're gonna act out. I think that's too simplistic. I think that the issue really is that those of us who have these issues are deeply, deeply invested in not having what happened to us in childhood happen again. And we're so deeply invested in not being abandoned, not being abused, not being left behind, not being whatever it was, that, we don't really allow ourselves to get as close to people as we might. And some of us don't choose people who can get as close to others of us as we might. And that can take all kinds of forms. I don't have to marry a sex addict if I've been a sex addict. I might simply marry someone who had tremendous physical trauma. Here's an example. I'll give you a little bit about my marriage. It's not all bad. How do I say this? I grew up with a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse, a lot of very painful stuff. So did the person I married. We're very good at spending time together alone, which means we can both be on the computer together, and I'm doing something and he's doing something. We don't talk to each other. We don't relate to each other. We don't connect to each other. And that's fine with us. We actually can go hours not connecting and just being together in the same space. Then we might connect. Some people might say, oh my God, how can you guys sit together? You're not talking. That's togetherness for us. And if we were deeply together in conversation, communicating all the time, I think we would lose our minds. So we have different ways that we are able to be together without getting into it or necessarily every couple has patterns and ways that they can tolerate it. By the way, if I hadn't had abuse of my husband's family, maybe we would find ways to be closer on a more regular basis. And in many ways we have and we do. But I also accommodate the understanding that with what I grew up with, I'm amazed I can walk and chew gum at the same time, no less actually have a meaningful relationship. So the way I conduct that relationship based on the abuse that I grew up with and the trauma that my spouse grew up with, that's really up to us. As long as we have integrity and love and commitment. Now if I get the message, look, put that computer down, I want your attention, I better put that computer down and pay attention because that's important. But I can also note that my spouse is perfectly fine letting me have my space and doing his own thing, and we're good with that. So what I'm saying to you is that even couples who struggle with intimacy issues, when they work through the addiction part or the active part that keeps them separate, that doesn't mean that my love is going to look like your love. Your love may look like this, and my love may look like this. And, some other ones are going to look like that. The degree to which we connect, the ways we connect, it's all really individual. And those of us who are addicted and tend to be involved with people who love us, addicts, tend to be involved with people who have a few issues that are similar to ours, but not exactly the same. It's not a bad thing as long as you're talking about it, you're working on it, and you're open to growing with it as a couple.
And with that, I apologize to those of you that asked questions that we aren't going to be able to get to. I would invite you to bring them back next week, or Dr. David Fawcett has a webinar where he gives some educational information and then does answer questions, and that would be Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. There are lots of drop-in groups and things. One of our drop-in group moderators was on earlier asking questions, which was great. So please, there are so many free resources that are on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com website. I invite you to gravitate towards those. And if you're looking for specific help, reach out through the contact information. You'll find us and we'll do our best to answer those questions for you as well. So
yeah, we will find you. We're not, You know, we're not patient hunting here. You know, if you want to find a book, we'll find you a book. If you want to find a therapist, we'll refer you to a therapist. You know, this is really the service part of our work, and we're really proud of it. So we're
Yeah.
glad to help. If you want help, come find us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rob.
See you guys later. Bye for now.
Bye.